Chapter 21 of Rose in Bloom by Louisa May Alcott. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 21 How Phoebe Earned Her Welcome. Dr. Alec had not arrived, but bad tidings had, as Rose guessed the instant her eye fell upon Aunt Plenty, hobbling downstairs with her cap awry, her face pale and a letter flapping wildly in her hand, as she cried distractedly, "Oh, my boy! Sick, and I not there to nurse him! Malignant fever, so far away! What can those children do? Why did I let Alec go?" Rose got her into the parlor, and, while the poor old lady lamented, she read the letter which Phoebe had sent to her that she might break the news carefully to Rose. "Dear Miss Plenty, please read this to yourself first, and tell my little mistress as you think best. The dear doctor is very ill, but I am with him, and shall not leave him day or night till he is safe. So trust me, and do not be anxious, for everything shall be done that care and skill and entire devotion can do. He would not let us tell you before, fearing you would try to come at the risk of your health. Indeed, it would be useless, for only one nurse is needed, and I came first. So do not let Rose or anybody else rob me of my right to the danger and the duty. Mac has written to his father, for Dr. Alec is now too ill to know what we do, and we both felt that you ought to be told without further delay. He has a bad malignant fever, caught no one can tell, unless among some poor immigrants whom he met wandering about quite forlorn in a strange city. He understood Portuguese and sent them to a proper place when they had told their story, but I fear he has suffered for his kindness, for this fever came on rapidly, and before he knew what it was I was there, and it was too late to send me away. Now I can show you how grateful I am, and if need be give my life so gladly for this friend, who has been a father to me. Tell Rose his last conscious word and thought were for her. Don't let her come. Keep my darling safe. Oh, do obey him. Stay safely at home, and, God helping me, I'll bring Uncle Alec back in time. Mac is all I will let him. We have the best physicians, and everything is going as well as can be hoped till the fever turns. Dear Miss Plenty, pray for him and for me, that I may do this one happy thing for those who have done so much for your ever dutiful and loving Phoebe." As Rose looked up from the letter, half stunned by the sudden news and the great danger, she found that the old lady had already stopped useless bewailing and was praying heartily, like one who knew well where help was to be found. Rose went and knelt down at her knee, laying her face on the clasped hands in her lap, and for a few minutes neither wept nor spoke. Then a stifled sob broke from the girl, and Aunt Plenty gathered the young head in her arms, saying, with the slow tears of age trickling down her own withered cheeks, "Bear up, my lamb, bear up. The good Lord won't take him from us, I am sure, and that brave child will be allowed to pay her debt to him. I feel she will." "But I want to help. I must go, Auntie. I must, no matter what the danger is," cried Rose, full of a tender jealousy of Phoebe for being first to brave peril for the sake of him who had been a father to them both. "You can't go, dear. It's no use now, and she is right to say keep away. I know those fevers, and the ones who nurse often take it, and fare worse for the strain they've been through. Good girl to stand by so bravely, to be so sensible, and not let Mac go near. She's a grand nurse. Alec couldn't have a better, and she'll never leave him till he's safe," said Miss Plenty excitedly. "Ah, you begin to know her now and value her as you ought. I think few would have done as she has, and if she does get ill and die, it will be our fault partly, because she'd go through fire and water to make us do her justice and receive her as we ought," cried Rose, proud of an example which she longed to follow. "If she brings my boy home, I'll never say another word. She may marry every nephew I've got, if she likes, and I'll give her my blessing," exclaimed Aunt Plenty, feeling that no price would be too much to pay for such a deed. Rose was going to clap her hands, but wrung them instead, remembering with a sudden pang that the battle was not over yet, and it was much too soon to award the honors. Before she could speak, Uncle Mac and Aunt Jane hurried in, for Mac's letter had come with the other, and dismay fell upon the family at the thought of danger to the well-beloved Uncle Alec. His brother decided to go at once, and Aunt Jane insisted on accompanying him, though all agreed that nothing could be done but wait and leave Phoebe at her post as long as she held out, since it was too late to save her from danger now, and Mac reported her quite equal to the task. Great was the hurry and confusion till the relief party was off. Aunt Plenty was heartbroken that she could not go with them, but felt that she was too infirm to be useful, and, like a sensible old soul, tried to content herself with preparing all sorts of comforts for the invalid. Rose was less patient, and at first had wild ideas of setting off alone and forcing her way to the spot where all her thoughts now centered. But before she could carry out any rash project, Aunt Myra's palpitations set in so alarmingly that they did good service for once, and kept Rose busy taking her last directions and trying to soothe her dying bed, for each attack was declared fatal till the patient demanded toast and tea, when hope was again allowable, and the rally began. The news flew fast, as such tidings always do, and Aunt Plenty was constantly employed in answering inquiries, for her knocker kept up a steady tattoo for several days. All sorts of people came, gentlefolk and paupers, children with anxious little faces, old people full of sympathy, pretty girls sobbing as they went away, and young men who relieved their feelings by swearing at all immigrants in general and Portuguese in particular. It was touching and comforting to see how many loved the good man, who was known only by his benefactions, and now lay suffering far away, quite unconscious how many unsuspected charities were brought to light by this grateful solicitude, as hidden flowers spring up when warm rains fall. If Rose had ever felt that the gift of living for others was a poor one, she saw now how beautiful and blessed it was, how rich the returns, how wide the influence, how much more precious the tender tie which knit so many hearts together than any breath of fame or brilliant talent that dazzled but did not win and warm. In after years she found how true her uncle's words had been, and, listening to eulogies of great men, felt less moved and inspired by praises of their splendid gifts than by the sight of some good man's patient labor for the poorest of his kind. Her heroes ceased to be the world's favorites and became such as Garrison fighting for his chosen people, Howe restoring lost senses to the deaf, the dumb, and blind, Summer unbribable when other men were bought and sold, and many a large-hearted woman working as quietly as Abby Gibbons, who for 30 years had made Christmas merry for 200 little paupers in a city almshouse, besides saving Magdalens and teaching convicts. The lesson came to Rose when she was ready for it, and showed her what a noble profession philanthropy is, made her glad of her choice, and helped fit her for a long life full of the loving labor and sweet satisfaction unostentatious charity brings to those who ask no reward and are content if only God knows. Several anxious weeks went by, with wearing fluctuations of hope and fear, for life and death fought over the prize each wanted, and more than once death seemed to have won. But Phoebe stood at her post, defying both danger and death with the courage and devotion women often show. All her soul and strength were in her work, and, when it seemed most hopeless, she cried out with a passionate energy which seems to send such appeals straight up to heaven, "Grant me this one boon, dear Lord, and I will never ask another for myself." Such prayers avail much, and such entire devotion often seems to work miracles when other aids are vain. Phoebe's cry was answered, her self-forgetful task accomplished, and her long vigil rewarded with a happy dawn. Dr. Alec always said that she kept him alive by the force of her will, and that, during the hours which he seemed to lie unconscious, he felt a strong, warm hand holding his, as if keeping him from the swift current trying to sweep him away. The happiest hour of all her life was that in which he knew her, looked up with the shadow of a smile in his hollow eyes, and turned to say in his old cheery way, "Tell Rose I've turned the corner, thanks to you, my child." She answered very quietly, smoothed the pillow, and saw him drop asleep again before she stole away into the other room, meaning to write the good news, but could only throw herself down and find relief for a full heart in the first tears she had shed for weeks. Mac found her there, and took such care of her that she was ready to go back to her place, now indeed a post of honor, while he ran off to send home a telegram which made many hearts sing for joy and caused Jamie, in his first burst of delight, to propose ringing all the city bells and order out the cannon. Saved, thanks to God and Phoebe. That was all, but everyone was satisfied, and everyone fell a-crying, as if hope needed much salt water to strengthen it. That was soon over, however, and then people went about smiling and saying to one another with handshakes or embraces, "He is better, no doubt of it now." A general desire to rush away and assure themselves of the truth pervaded the family for some days, and nothing but awful threats from Mac, stern mandates from the doctor, and entreaties from Phoebe not to undo her work kept Miss Plenty, Rose, and Aunt Jessie at home. As the only way in which they could ease their minds and bear the delay, they set about spring cleaning with an energy which scared the spiders and drove charwomen distracted. If the old house had been infected with smallpox, it could not have been more vigorously scrubbed, aired, and refreshed. Early as it was, every carpet was routed up, curtains pulled down, cushions banged, and glory holes turned out, till not a speck of dust, a last year's fly, or stray straw could be found. Then they all sat down and rested in such an immaculate mansion that one hardly dared to move for fear of destroying the shining order everywhere visible. It was late in April before this was accomplished, and the necessary quarantine of the absentees well over. The first mild days seemed to come early, so that Dr. Alec might return with safety from the journey which had so nearly been his last. It was perfectly impossible to keep any member of the family away on that great occasion. They came from all quarters in spite of express directions to the contrary, for the invalid was still very feeble, and no excitement must be allowed. As if the wind had carried the glad news, Uncle Jim came into port the night before. Will and Geordie got a leave on their own responsibility. Steve would have defied the entire faculty had it been necessary, and Uncle Mac and Archie said simultaneously, "Business be hanged today." Of course, the aunts arrived all in their best, all cautioning everybody else to keep quiet, and all gabbling excitedly at the least provocation. Jamie suffered most during that day, so divided was he between the desire to behave well and the frantic impulse to shout at the top of his voice, turn somersaults, and race all over the house. Occasional bolts into the barn, where he let off steam by roaring and dancing jigs, to the great dismay of the fat old horses and 2 sedate cows, helped him to get through that trying period. But the heart that was fullest beat and fluttered in Rose's bosom as she went about putting spring flowers everywhere, very silent but so radiant with happiness that the aunts watched her, saying softly to one another, "Could an angel look sweeter?" If angels ever wore pale green gowns and snowdrops in their hair, countenances full of serenest joy, and large eyes shining with an inward light that made them very lovely, then Rose did look like one. But she felt like a woman, and well she might, for was not life very rich that day when uncle, friend, and lover were coming back to her together? Could she ask anything more except the power to be to all of them the creature they believed her, and to return the love they gave her with one as faithful, pure, and deep? Among the portraits in the hall hung one of Dr. Alec, taken soon after his return by Charlie in one of his brief fits of inspiration. Only a crayon, but wonderfully lifelike and carefully finished, as few of the others were. This had been handsomely framed, and now held the place of honor, garlanded with green wreaths, while the great Indian jar below blazed with a pyramid of hothouse flowers sent by Kitty. Rose was giving these a last touch, with Dulcie close by, cooing over a handful of sweet daffy-down-diddlies, when the sound of wheels sent her flying to the door. She meant to have spoken the first welcome and had the first embrace, but when she saw the altered face in the carriage, the feeble figure being borne up the steps by all the boys, she stood motionless till Phoebe caught her in her arms, whispering with a laugh and a cry struggling in her voice, "I did it for you, my darling, all for you." "Oh, Phoebe, never say again you owe me anything. I never can repay you for this," was all Rose had time to answer as they stood one instant cheek to cheek, heart to heart, both too full of happiness for many words. Aunt Plenty had heard the wheels also, and, as everybody rose en masse, had said as impressively as extreme agitation would allow, while she put her glasses on upside down and seized the lace tidy instead of her handkerchief, "Stop! All stay here and let me receive Alec. Remember his weak state and be calm, quite calm as I am." "Yes, Aunt, certainly," was a general murmur of assent, but it was as impossible to obey as it would have been to keep feathers still in a gale, and one irresistible impulse carried the whole roomful into the hall to behold Aunt Plenty beautifully illustrate her own theory of composure by waving the tidy wildly rushing into Dr. Alec's arms and laughing and crying with an hysterical abandonment which even Aunt Myra could not have surpassed. The tearful jubilee was soon over, however, and no one seemed the worse for it, for the instant his arms were at liberty, Uncle Alec forgot himself and began to make other people happy by saying seriously, though his thin face beamed paternally as he drew Phoebe forward, "Aunt Plenty, but for this good daughter I never should have come back to be so welcomed. Love her for my sake." Then the old lady came out splendidly and showed her mettle, for, turning to Phoebe, she bowed her gray head as if saluting an equal, and offering her hand, answered with repentance, admiration, and tenderness trembling in her voice, "I'm proud to do it for her own sake. I ask pardon for my silly prejudices, and I'll prove that I'm sincere by—where's that boy?" There were 6 boys present, but the right one was in exactly the right place at the right moment, and seizing Archie's hand, Aunt Plenty put Phoebe's into it, trying to say something appropriately solemn, but could not, so hugged them both and sobbed out, "If I had a dozen nephews, I'd give them all to you, my dear, and dance at the wedding, though I had rheumatism in every limb." That was better than any oration, for it set them all to laughing, and Dr. Alec was floated to the sofa on a gentle wave of merriment. Once there, everyone but Rose and Aunt Plenty was ordered off by Mac, who was in command now, and seemed to have sunk the poet in the physician. The house must be perfectly quiet, and he must go to sleep as soon as possible after the journey, so all say good-bye now and call again tomorrow, he said, watching his uncle anxiously as he leaned in the sofa corner, with 4 women taking off his wraps, 3 boys contending for his overshoes, 2 brothers shaking hands at short intervals, and Aunt Myra holding a bottle of strong salts under his devoted nose every time there was an opening anywhere. With difficulties the house was partially cleared, and then, while Aunt Plenty mounted guard over her boy, Rose stole away to see if Mac had gone with the rest, for as yet they had hardly spoken in the joyful flurry, though eyes and hands had met. End of Chapter 21. Recording by Maria Therese.